orders which has been provided. As an assessment order is passed, the appeal provisions are provided in 246 capital A. However, there are certain orders, certain notices which cannot be challenged. There, the Constitution of India comes in place. We have a remedy which is provided under Article 226, whereby we can challenge any order, notice before the court on the grounds which he has just mentioned, like violation of Article 40, Article 20, Article 19G, which is right to carry on a trade, profession or business, and on these grounds normally we file writs. Under the income tax proceedings, normally we file writs against a notice under 148 after the objections are disposed. We file writs against an order which is passed under section 264, because against the order passed by a commissioner under 264 there is no remedy by way of an appeal. If an order is passed by a settlement commission, that is not an appealable order, we file a writ against that order. Mind it, when we file this, it is not an appeal, we are filing a writ whereby we have to show that what is something palpably wrong in the order, something which could not have been passed, or it is not in accordance with Income Tax Act. And because the order is not in accordance with Income Tax Act, it directly violates Article 14 of the Constitution. So this is the correlation what we have to draw in these writs.
Advance ruling also will fall here?
Advance ruling has to go now, as per a recent judgment. Advance ruling earlier used to go directly to Supreme Court, but there is a judgment passed by Justice Kapadia. Now you have to file a writ to the respective high courts against a ARR ruling. Similarly, where there is a return file, a belated return file, and you are claiming some losses or some deduction. Now how to do it? Because 80 AC is coming, there are provisions. If you are not filed your return under 139(1) in time, you are not entitled to claim or carry forward the loss or claim that deduction. You approach the CBDT under section 119. Normally you find that they rejected, they do not condone the delay. Again, the remedy is only to go to the High Court under 226. Then, for refunds are not granted, you file a writ to the High Court. If there is a search action, the search action is in violation of section 132, other provisions, your stock has been seized. Then we challenge that illegality before the court under 226. So these are the areas where we challenge. Just to give you a brief background about the nature of writs. Normally we have 5 types of writs. These are named habeas corpus. It means produce the body of the person. Normally it applies to criminal proceedings, cases where kidnapping or murder has taken place. A person is in, I don't know where he is. The court directs the police produce that person live or his body before the court, which is called as a habeas corpus. There is a writ which is called mandamus. It is a preventive, it is to correct something which has been done wrong. A mandamus is there. Then there is a writ which is called certiorari. Again, directing the authority to do something. There is a writ called prohibitio, asking a person to stay on, do not proceed further in the matter. And there is a last 5th writ which is called quo warranto, which means what is your authority to do a particular thing. So these are the 5 types of writs normally we challenge. For the tax proceedings, normally the writ of mandamus, certiorari, quo warranto and prohibitio is applicable. Also in the talk, Professor has just mentioned about Keshwanand Bharati case, and he said about the independence of judiciary. When the national tax tribunal bill was challenged, the matter once was argued before the Bombay High Court in the case of P.C. Joshi. In the course of argument, this independence of judiciary is provided under the directive principle, Article 50. As he pointed out that this is not a fundamental right. When we file this writs, the other side, from the union, they objected that look, they are challenging Article 50, which is a directive principle, and really their fundamental rights is not affected. And it is a matter of policy for the courts, for the parliaments to decide and to legislate law. And the court should be very slow in interfering on this. Thereafter, we made a counter argument by relying on this very decision of Keshwanand Bharati where we have explained that in basic structure, indirectly, this particular principle of independence of the judiciary has brought into the basic structure of the constitution, which the legislature cannot touch upon. They cannot touch upon this or change this. And the main reason, if you will read the decision of the Supreme Court in National Tax Tribunal, the main reason is revolving around this Keshwanand Bhartiya decision, basic principle of independence of judiciary, which has been challenged there. Of course, there are other reasons also stated in that. So this is something of brief background which is directly affecting our rights in the tax proceedings where we take use of Constitution of India. Just one more thing, as we have Article 226, we have one more article which is called Article 32, where the writs are filed directly to the Supreme Court. Once we are filing a writ to the Supreme Court, we have to file a writ under Article 32. But as we are in the state, so if we want to approach the High Court, the writ has to be filed under Article 226. We normally don't directly jump and go to the Supreme Court under Article 32. This is something which I felt I should share with you. Coming to my topic, natural justice. I have divided my topic in three parts. Basically, I will deal with the basic concept of natural justice. Thereafter, I will let you know what are the basic features and how it is affecting our tax proceeding, how we can use to the best of for our tax proceeding. And there are a few decisions, and I will like to have an interactive session where you can put your thoughts or your queries to this, where I will try to answer them. Basically, natural justice is a branch of administrative law or a public law. Every administrative action has to comply with the principle of natural justice. Many authors, many decisions, many jurists have tried to define this particular principle, what you mean really by natural justice. In a simple sense, if I have to say, I will say that natural justice is nothing but common sense. It is something common sense. It is not complex. It is not technical. It is something substantial justice. If I have to do justice with someone, what are the basic things which I will require to follow? This is what natural justice means. Natural justice has been evolved over a period of time and been developed considering our culture, tradition, and obviously the judicial interference in this subject, and it has evolved. If you will see our Act, Income Tax Act, there are various sections. These principles are indirectly embedded in the section. For example, hearing. There are provisions where there any application is made. The Act itself provides that you will be heard. However, let me give you an example. Notice under section 148. There is no provision under the Act which says that once a notice is issued, thereafter there is something which is called that you have to file an objection and the assessing officer is required to pass an order. This has been evolved by the process of law. GK Driveshafts has put, look, once a notice is issued, you have to provide the reasons, the SSC has to file the return, raise the objections, and thereafter the objection has to be disposed. And thereafter, if still the SSC is agreed, he can approach the court by filing a writ. There are places where the particular provision has very specifically provided that you will be heard on a particular application or an appeal or any particular notice has been issued, you will be heard. If that is not done, then what? Then we have this ground that there is a violation of principle of natural justice, and therefore the notice or the order which has been passed is violative of this principle and is required to be squashed or struck down. There was a debate on this over a period of time that whether this particular principles of natural justice is very much applicable to administrative proceedings, because this is a principle which normally we see it's applicable to peculiar court proceedings, and there was a lot of debate over this. However, various courts have come across, you will see, that they have interpreted this provision, this principle, and they have said this is indeed applicable to every administrative action. Because once an administrative action is effective or has some civil consequences, this particular principle is required to be followed. So unless you don't follow this principle, your order or your particular action, administrative action, will be liable to be challenged on this very ground. Coming further, this natural justice broadly has two basic principles. The first is audi alterum mater, which means no one should be condemned unheard. It is basically a right to be heard. But if you will say simply that right to be heard, okay fine, the hearing has to be granted. But the meaning is not limited to this. It has further principles, further ingredients embedded in this. I will come to that little later. The second principle is nemo judex in re sua, which means no one should be made a judge in his own cause. Basically, this principle is based on the principle of bias. The judge who is deciding a matter should not be biased in the subject matter what he is deciding. Again, you will say that how a bias will be put. A very difficult thing. Normally we don't see in our tax proceedings somebody is challenging an order or saying that this is biased. But if you will go in civil litigation, now and then you will be reading in the newspaper a judge has rescued himself from a matter. Why? Because he might have known that person or that company, he must have, when he was a lawyer, he might have briefed that company or he must have handled some litigation of that company. Many times judges rescue from the matter because the person is a relative of that or he has some interest in the subject matter. So these are some forms of bias. The reasons being that it has been said that the judges should be above suspicion. It's like a Caesar's wife. She was above suspicion. Julius Caesar left his wife, and when the question was asked, he said, no, a single suspicion over her has made me to leave that. There are different debates on that. We will not go, but this was the answer, and from there this particular principle has been evolved. I will come further to the basic principle which this principle have been evolved in the tax proceedings also. For example, in one of the decisions of Tata International, where a 148 notice was issued, however, the reasons was not provided to the SSC till the completion of the assessment proceedings. The tribunal, the Mumbai tribunal, has taken a view that this is a requirement of law, that once a 148 notice has been issued, the reason has to be provided. If you provide the reasons after completion of the assessment, that will not make the default good enough, and therefore the whole proceeding was squashed. Similar is the stand which has been taken in the case of Videsh Sanchar Nigam, which is also reported in 340 ITR, page 66, where the Bombay High Court has taken that once you have not provided the copy of the reasons, later on, when in the appellate stage, you try to provide this copy of the reasons to the petitioner, you will not make good the default which you have committed earlier. And therefore, the whole assessment is to be void. But mind it, these are the cases where the SSC had specifically demanded the copy of the reason and he was not provided. Because there is another class of decision over this subject where they have taken a view that if you have not demanded the copy of reasons at the initial stage, later on in the appellate stage, don't come and cry that, look, he has not given me the reasons and I have not raised the objection to that effect. So you have to be very sure that at least in these types of proceedings, you raise these types of questions at the initial stage and not at the appellate stage. Because courts will be slow in allowing you any further relief on these points.
So that it will be order will be void or it will be set aside.
If there is no reasons given, it will be certainly void. But if there are other infirmities, for example, I will give you a classic example of Kanwar Lal's case, where it was a case under the FEMA. He was a minister and there were some issues of oil import and kickbacks which was received by this person. And in that, when the proceedings show cause was issued, the petitioner challenged the matter that show cause notice before the Delhi High Court and said that look, they are issued me show cause notice and they are asking me to file a reply, but at the same time they are not giving me the evidence which they have bought from and gathered, which are they going to be used against me. The Delhi High Court at the first instance set aside the matter and said this is a matter to be decided by the concerned investigating officer, what are the documents to be given and what he is going to do, because the matter is still at the show cause level. Thereafter the matter again proceeded, the petitioner again demanded the same thing and the investigating officer provided some details but not the complete details. And he gave reasons that his demand is unreasonable. Whatever the important documents are has already been. He challenged the matter further to the Supreme Court and he raised this plea that principle of natural justice is violated because they have not provided me the documents on which they are relying and I am supposed to show cause. The Supreme Court said that this principle of natural justice has not to be taken in air. You have to see that what is the matter, what are the proceedings and what are you demanding. And thereafter you have to decide. Here it is a case where a show cause notice has been issued. It is not that the finality of the assessment in this matter or the ultimate decision is being taken. You are required to reply the show cause and for which the department has already issued you certain documents. And that is more than sufficient for you to reply the show cause notice issued by the department. And they dismiss the petition of the petitioner on this ground itself. So it is not in each and every case, the principle is you cannot put it in a straight jacket formula that each and every case you are entitled to demand each and everything. For example, I will come again to 148. In 148, let's take a live example of this Hawala dealers case. Normally 148 notice you will find that there is some information received from so and so department and these some dealers are there who have been treated as bogus and therefore and you have dealt with those dealers and therefore this 148 notice is issued. Here at this stage of 148, if you will ask the assessing officer, look, you give me the statement of those parties, I will like to cross-examination of those parties and thereafter you proceed with the assessment. According to me, this plea is not correct. You can ask them for the details or the information, but everything you cannot demand at the initial stage of show cause. Yes, when the matter proceeds further, when the assessing officer wants to make the addition further on the basis of the statement or the basis of the material which they have gathered from various authorities, that is the stage where you will demand the cross-examination and further to rebut that particular material. So that is the stage. So it depends, as I said, it depends on the proceedings what is involved, the issues what are involved, and thereafter you can apply this principle to that particular subject. As I have discussed, this first principle or the alternate pattern basically means fair hearing. But fair hearing means what? The first requirement of fair hearing is right to notice. Before a hearing takes place, you have a right to notice. You should be put to show cause that what is the matter, what is the hearing is all about, what is you have to answer, what you have to rebut in that proceedings. So the first requirement of a fair hearing is that the person should be put to notice, look, you have to come on so and so date, so and so place, and you have to answer these charges or these issues which have been levied on you. And this is the first principle of fair hearing, that the other side be put to notice before anything is being asked. Further, that time should be provided to that person should be adequate. It is not that in the last fag you tell him that tomorrow you have to come with all these details and if you don't come, I am going to pass an assessment order. In this context, we have GK and drive shafts. There is another decision of change in jurisdiction under 127. Whenever there is change in jurisdiction, an opportunity to a hearing has been provided. Whenever you transfer a case from one jurisdiction to another, Section 127 provides that the person should be put to notice, he should be given an opportunity to explain and why the jurisdiction should not be changed. So the requirement of law is that if you are doing something, you put to notice to the other person, take his say on the matter, and thereafter you decide the particular issue. The other aspects of notice is time, place, nature of hearing, legal authority under which the hearing is to be held, and the charges which is there has to be specified in the notice. The second requirement of fair hearing is that right to know the evidence against him. So if there is some adverse material which is going to be used against you, you should be made aware that these are the material, these are the things which I am going to use against you to frame the assessment, and you are required to rebut the same or give your explanation on the subject. For example, any third person statements are there. So this is, if he is relying on that third person statement, you are entitled to demand a copy of that statement, and thereafter you are required to rebut the same. But remember, these things have to be demanded at the initial stage. If you don't demand this at the initial stage and later on you say that, look, you have not been provided with the statement of that third person on the basis of which you are alleging that some on money or some particular transaction has been undertaken, probably you will not be able to answer the same. But at the appellate level, if you start demanding all this, the courts will be slow in granting you such relief. So if you are demanding these types of documents or these types of things, see that you demand at the initial stage and rebut the same in the first initial proceeding itself. At least your demand should be there. If they refuse to comply with it, certainly it will be a ground when you challenge your order or the assessment order before the first appellate authority. Take this as a ground that I had made a specific request, however the material was not provided, the cross-examination was not provided, the copy of the statement was not provided, and therefore the order is violative of the principle of natural justice. Many times we see, though there is a specific demand, but in the grounds of appeal we don't raise this ground. So see that whenever you file an appeal before the first appellate and or before the ITA, we see that you raise these grounds also in your grounds of appeal. If any queries are there, please, I will be, yes sir.
This 148 cases,
Yeah.
when you have raised cross-objection
Yes.
and the order is passed
Yes.
without disposing of your objection,
Yes.
objections,
Yes.
can it be said that this rule of natural justice is violated?
Correct.
And therefore the order passed by the AO
Yes.
is to be set as
Yes.
question.
On this issue, there are decisions of our own Bombay High Court in the case of Alana and Asian Paints, and there are third member decision also, which has said that if the objections has been filed by a SSC and it has not been disposed of by the assessing officer, it has caused some prejudice to that person. So in such a situation, they will not hold the assessment order as void ab initio. What they will do, they will set aside the matter back to the assessing officer, directing them to relook in the objection, pass a speaking order, disposing of the objection, and thereafter to proceed with the matter. Because whenever they have to struck down an order, the first thing what they have to see is what is the prejudice caused to the other side.
Can it be said that when there are, say, the assessing officer who has passed the order and the assessing officer who has reopened the case, they are two different officers?
Correct.
So then can it be said that whatever he has reviewed is change of opinion, because no two persons can look at the same facts and come to a similar conclusion?
See, if the matter has been set aside, back, the proceeding starts from that stage. The proceeding doesn't go that your notice is formed. He has not struck down your notice. See, there are two things. One thing is striking down the notice itself, and the second is sending the matter back to start from a particular stage. So the question what you raise is that he has not decided your objection. Court will say, okay, fine, go back. Let the officer decide your objection and thereafter proceed in the matter. In fact, there are few decisions which I have quoted in my and at the end of my notes, where the assessing officer in undue haste tried to pass an order, assessment orders. The courts have struck down and said, and they have imposed cost on the department, saying that there was no need to pass an order in such undue haste. In fact, it is the same example in one of the cases which I have listed back in case of 148. After disposing of 148, the objections raised in 148, the assessing officer the very next day he passed the assessment order, thereby not giving the assessee any time to challenge the objection which he had disposed. The court has observed that the time limit for completion of the assessment still 2 months was there. There were still details to be called from the assessee on the issues involved, and there was no reason for him to pass an order in such an undue haste manner. There was another decision of Allahabad High Court in the which I have listed there, where the issue was involved of 2011A. In that case also, the assessing officer within next 24 hours after issuing the notice, he passed and disposed of the matter. The courts have normally an appeal provision is there, alternative remedies available, but the Allahabad High Court entertained a writ. Normally, writ is also called as an extrajudicial jurisdiction of the court. In all circumstances, they don't entertain your writ. There are various requirements which we have to fulfill. It is a discretionary review. You will find in one case the writ has been admitted, but in another case it has not been. It's purely on the discretion of the judge, which obviously has to be exercised judicially. But there are various aspects which the courts see. The courts also see that if you have an alternative remedy, why are you coming rushing to the court? You will see in the Vodafone's case, they have entertained the writ, but that cannot be taken as precedent in that all matters, all SSCs go by that route and reach and get a judgment fast. It was only on peculiar facts, the issues involved, that the writ was entertained. But it is not that each and every case it will be entertained. As I said, the Allahabad High Court in 2018 entertained a writ because of the peculiar circumstances what is involved. They said directly there is a decision of Hindustan Coca-Cola where at the most the SSC can be saddled with penalty and interest, but you cannot recover the whole tax amount. Most of the recipient has already paid the tax. These were the facts on which they entertained the writ and they passed the order. So these are some requirements when we oppose the court in a writ.
But when objections are rejected, you can't file appeal. You have to take in the...
Once the objections are disposed, if you want to challenge it in a writ, you have sufficient reasons or grounds for that. You can approach the court in a writ, or you will allow the assessment to be completed, and thereafter you can go to the route of an appeal. There is another further feature is that right to cross-examination. Basically, if a third person has made some statement against you, so he has said something against you which the department wants to use against you, a right to cross-examination is available to you, but the same has to be demanded. It is not automatic that he will provide you this right. So, if a person has made a statement against you, the first requirement is that you should demand a copy of that statement, and thereafter you want to rebut that, you have to give your reasons and demand cross-examination of the party. Once the cross-examination is provided, you can cross-examine him on the aspects on which he has made a statement against you. If the department or if the assessing officer doesn't provide you this is one of the grounds what you have to take it before the appellate authorities, that the principle of natural justice has been violated because the right to cross-examination has been denied to you. Mind it that I have seen many times the grounds which have been drafted, a general ground is taken. The addition made by so-and-so assessing officer is bad in law because principle of natural justice is violated. In fact, there was a case where I saw that in all the grounds almost he had written after that this sentence, standard sentence. After reading, I asked him that what actually this natural justice is there. He said nothing. This looks good. When we challenge this natural justice, we have a good case. But I said, what is this natural justice? He is not allowed my ground. Therefore, it's violative of principle of natural justice. It is not so. You have to raise what are the ingredients of natural justice, what has been violated. Whether the material has not been given, whether the opportunity of fair hearing has not been given, whether the right to cross-examination has not been given, whether sufficient time has not been provided to provide the details. If the sufficient time has not been provided, what will happen? At the CIT appeal level, you may require to file additional evidence, which is again subject to section, Rule 46 capital A. If you will raise a plea that sufficient time to furnish the details has not been provided, that will directly correlate to admission of your additional evidence. One of the ground why your additional evidence should be admitted is that sufficient time was not provided to you for furnishing those details. So if you have such a ground, it will be very easy for you to get your additional evidence admitted before the first appellate authority. But this again should not be just because I am saying you put this ground. You have to disclose it that yes, the notice was issued at the fag and only 3 days time was provided and thereafter the order was passed. And therefore, there was sufficient time was not provided to me to furnish this complete detail. So it should be provided with all these facts. Right to counsel. Basically, right to counsel means that a person, the particular person should be entitled to be represented by a counsel, by a lawyer, by a chartered accountant before whichever forum he is there. Reasoned decision or a speaking order. Now this is which has been come through judicial intervention. Many times what used to happen, these orders when used to go to the higher or the appellate authorities or in a writ, courts used to find that the orders are passed in such a cryptic manner that you cannot find a reason why is so. The addition is made why? There are no reasons. It's just arbitrarily it has been passed. Matters are disposed of without assigning any reasons why this particular thing has been done. The courts, when you read that order, they have to, when this order is subject to challenge before the appellate authorities, the court has to decide that matter. But how they are going to decide if there are no reasons provided in the order? Only just because the assessing officer felt that this addition should be made or the tribunal has passed an order that this is to be allowed or this has to be disallowed. When the matter goes to the appellate authority, they have to see the order first. They read the order first. And if they don't find any speaking reasons, there are no reasoned decision, then what are they going to decide? Because the order is subject matter of challenge before the appellate authority. So over a period of time, the courts have said that reasons provided is a live link between the conclusion and the evidence. So there has to be a reasoned order. If the order is not passed by a speaking order, this is again one of the grounds what you can challenge before the appellate authority. We have seen many times CIT appeals all orders, they just copy what the assessing officer from the assessment order. The next part is the SSC submitted his submission. Again, it is in italics. It runs into number of pages what your submissions are there. And the last small paragraph, I have considered the submission and the record, and I find that there is no convincing reasons, so and so, so and so. And thereafter he says that the appeal is dismissed. This is not the manner in which an order is required to be passed. He has not to take the reasons given by the assessing officer. The appellate authority are required to give their own reason why the order is valid. It may be the same reason or the same basis what the assessing officer has done, but he has to deal with it. He cannot borrow the reasons of the assessing officer and come to the conclusion because what the assessing officer has done is correct. This is not for which an appeal has been filed. The appellate authority should decide a matter. In fact, there is one issue which is involved. Normally, if you don't appear before the appellate authorities, the appeals are dismissed ex parte by applying multi-pan decision. Can the CIT appeal do that? Answer is no. The CIT appeal has to pass a speaking order. He cannot dismiss our appeal by applying multi-pan. Even if we do not appear before the assessing officer, he has to pass an order on merits disposing of your each grounds of appeal raised before it. So these are the reasons that why there has to be a speaking order, why there has to be a reasoned decision in each order, so that what is the mind of that particular authority can be tested by the higher or the appellate authority. We see normally in the state petitions what we file before the commissioner or before the assessing officers, they pass a very cryptic order that so and so is dismissed. You are required to pay 50% of demand within the next 24 hours. When these orders are challenged before the court struck down these orders only on the ground that long back the Bombay High Court in KEC International had laid down the principle or the guidelines how to deal with stay application. But time and again in Mahindra and Mahindra, thereafter ICICI Bank, so many decisions are there. But these are not being followed. And they struck down these orders passed by these commissioners or the assistant commissioners on rejecting our stay application on a cryptic ground. Because the requirement of a stay application is that you have to explain that you are in appeal before the appellate authority, what are the, in brief, what is the case on your merits, what is likelihood of your winning the case, what is your financial position, if attachments are there, if recovery is taken, how you are going to be affected. If all this has been pleaded in your application, the assessing officer has to deal with all these aspects before he rejects your application. If he has not dealt it, it is a good ground to challenge all this before the higher authorities. So the orders passed should be a speaking or a reasoned order. The next rule which is there is rule against bias. Now, this again, if I will put in that simple language, it means that no one should be a judge in his own cause. Justice should not only be done, but manifestly and undoubtedly seen to be done. Basically, what this rule says, the rule says, for example, I am deciding a particular matter. I should not have any sort of bias when I am dealing with the subject matter. Bias can be of different forms. Bias can be monetary. Bias can be personal bias. There can be official bias. So if these types of bias can be proved in a particular case, the order can be again challenged. If you remember the famous Vodafone case, which was decided by the Supreme Court, after the Vodafone case was decided, a review petition was filed in the Supreme Court, wherein certain allegation was made against one of the judges that some of his family members or was far off related to one of the concern where the Vodafone issues were dealt by the auditors of the Vodafone were dealing. And this review petition was subsequently dismissed as being frivolous. But normally, as I said, you see, you read in newspapers that judges rescue themselves from the matters on the ground of some interest is there or some personal touch is there in the subject matter. They try to rescue themselves. These things we normally don't see in income tax. But one of the issues which is affecting in our tax proceeding is this. If a CITLP has decided your matter and thereafter he is for reason elevated as a judge of a tribunal or a member of a tribunal, can he decide that same matter if it is come before him? Answer is no. Another issue, DRP, if you recollect, Uttarakhand High Court said, a commissioner, a jurisdictional commissioner cannot be the member in DRP adjudicating the matter of that particular SSC. And thereafter, there was changes in the constitution of the DRP members. And there has been specifically provided that the jurisdictional commissioner of the particular SSC cannot be a member of DRP. So, this is some form of principle of bias which is applicable to the income tax proceedings.
It can be CIT DR. Now suppose CIT appeal has decided
CIT
in favor
DR,
of.
again as I said, this is applicable to the judge who is deciding. The DR is arguing the matter. So probably there it will not be available. And this is a very dangerous because there is some sort of something which is being pointed out. In civil litigation, you will see many times only to just avoid the petitioner or the appellant comes and say that I don't want this matter to be heard by this particular bench. And many times the judge just rescue themselves. Many times they get annoyed and say, no, you prove it. We will hear this matter. Whatever you want to do the allegation, you make it. But you will hear the matter. So these are the certain reasons or principles on which this particular grounds can be challenged, provided you are able to prove this bias. Normally, as I said, this principle of natural justice is cornerstone for a civilized society. In every civilized society, this principle of natural justice changes color. It doesn't have any strict form or shape. It depends on the nature of proceeding, the nature of act which is being, the nature of issues which are involved, and thereafter this principle has to be applied. I have listed down few case laws on this, which I have directly or indirectly dealt in my talk. if some more queries or something is there from the participants, I am ready to deal with it. Otherwise, I have completed this. The decision which I have laid down at the end is given on these few principles where they have dealt with it, dealing with 148, dealing with cross-examination, writ jurisdiction, and opportunity of hearing. If any queries are there, I am ready to take from the participant. Yes.
Ajay Singh, it is not pertaining to direct tax.
Yeah.
Pertaining to indirect tax, which is question Pallavi law.
Right.
Indirect tax, you have a very specific situation where the so-called notice, issued by the officer, and the same officer adjudicates you. It is not the basic, the contravention of the principle of natural justice because he has issued the so-called notice. He puts number of the allegations on you, and then the same fellow adjudicates the said matter.
See, what you are raising is not, he is not making the allegation against you.
Yes.
He is the person who is issuing a show cause notice to you, asking about that these are the violations which you have done, kindly reply. I will give you a very classic example. During our college days, this was a very famous case to explain this, which we remember and used to write in our paper also. It was a case of a minister. The name of the decision I can't recall, some Gulapi or some name was there, where the minister was a transport minister and he had the permission to issue permits. At the same time, he also had a transport firm which was running. And the decision what he was taking was more in the favor of that particular firm on issuing the permits or the route permits. And he passed certain orders whereby that particular route permit was to be given to only a class of those transporters. That matter was challenged and the court struck down saying that you are one of the interested party in that. How can you yourself decide? You cannot be a judge in your own cause. This is what the basic principle is starting from here. You cannot be a judge in your own cause. I will give you the moment you raise this question, one recent issue came in my mind. I have come across some orders which are passed under 1023C, where that you get the exemption for the schools or hospitals, trust. There, in one matter, the application was rejected. And when the chartered accountant came, I asked him what are the details, because this is the reasons which are given that you have never not filed so and so details, you have not filed your bank statements, etc. etc. He said, no, I have filed everything. I said, show, okay, fine. He showed me a show cause notice, what was issued, the details to be filed. It was issued by some assistant commissioner from the office of the Commissioner of Income Tax. Thereafter, I asked him further, who took the hearing?